Let's go back in history a little bit. Tell us about the King's time at Timbertop.
So he went there as a 17-year-old. He went there sort of to get the posh bits knocked off him. He's talked about that. He said it was a very happy time of his life. In fact, he ended up spending 2 terms rather than 1 term there. He was referred to as a pommy bastard by some of his fellow classmates, but he always speaks of that time in his life fondly. He's been back to Timbertops for celebrations and anniversaries, and it was a time in his life. He was at Gordonston in Scotland, which was a very unhappy schooling period for him. So to go to this place, which we know he's always had this affection for nature, for the outdoors, for the climate, and he was really immersed in, you know, the Australian bush, which was a beautiful time for him. I mean, look, he said it was hard. He said there was going up hills in, you know, a blood-stained shirt and that sort of thing. But whenever asked about it, there's a smile on his face.
And, I mean, it's kind of funny that a prince, a wealthy prince, comes to Australia in the middle of the bush, in the alpine parts of Victoria. Did it rough him up a little bit?
It did rough him up a little bit because, you know, the thing about Australians is they, as he said, they call a spade a spade. And they, you know, he talks about this anecdote about when he had to go and check on the younger boys and he walked into the room at night and it was raining. He had an umbrella and he said as he was leaving, this is the time that he was called a pommy bastard. And look, he laughs about it. He's very fond of that time. But I think what's really interesting is that all members of the royal family have an affection with those countries they went to when they were younger. If you think about William and Harry, they have a tremendous affection for Africa. Harry, Lesotho, William, Kenya. The Queen Mother had enormous affection for Canada. She always wanted to go back there. The Queen Elizabeth wanted to go to Malta because she'd had some very happy before her reign. She spent a lot of time there with Prince Philip. So I think having these connections that are away from the country that they grew up in, it's almost like a gap year for them. You know, these experiences that they wouldn't ordinarily have.
What are some of the more iconic memories of Prince Charles's time here in Australia?
Well, the number one iconic memory, of course, was when he was still a bachelor and he was kissed on the beach in Cottesloe in WA. He was coming out of the water. A very pretty young model, 26-year-old model Jane Priest, ran up to him, planted a kiss on him. She was kind of set up to do it by a photographer, and I've worked a lot with British photographers, and I know they always want the picture, but at the time there was this sort of thought that it made him look more dateable. And of course, not long after that, he met his wife, Princess Diana. So maybe it worked.
What about that interview on Countdown, Molly Meldrum with a young Prince Charles? What a disaster.
That interview with Molly Meldrum, when the then Prince Charles sat down and look, Charles trying not to laugh, but Molly just totally losing it, sweating, swearing, can't get his words right. I mean, it's one of the funniest things. And then, of course, the king, well, then he was the prince, his then takedown of that when it was a Countdown anniversary, and the way that he just took the mickey out of Molly Meldrum, I thought was hilarious. And it shows the royals, you know, the Queen has a sense of humour. The Paddington Bear video, all sorts of, I think they really like to engage with ordinary people and ordinary life, and sometimes when things go wrong, it creates memories for them. We just don't need it to be picture perfect all the time. That's the things that make their working lives memorable, I think.
There was also an attempt on his life. It was back in 1994. What happened?
He was down at Tumbalong Park in Darling Harbour. He was about to give awards to 2 young people who were coming up. He actually, he's standing on the stage and there's the sound of 2 shots. And if you look at the video of it, you hear these shots and he's sort of fiddling with his cufflinks and he doesn't quite know what's happened straight away. And then what happens is he's pushed out of the way by a security guard. In fact, the then Premier got involved and tried to tussle this man. It was something called a starter gun. He wasn't hit, or shot. The shots didn't hit him, but a little bit unnerving, of course. He later said, in an interview that, you think that you're going to react like James Bond or Indiana Jones, but you don't. That's not how you respond. You sort of freeze. But it gave him some... you contemplate what the role means. And of course, he then, when the recent Trump attempted assassination, he sent a letter to Donald Trump to, mark the fact that it must have been scary for him and to give his condolences to the person that died in that shooting. So it obviously, there's a connection there still with him after all these years.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Charles and Diana's visit back in 1983. This was their first overseas tour together. How did it go? How would you describe it?
That trip went very well for Diana, of course, because she's a 22-year-old. She brings her 10-month-old beautiful baby, and she is just a superstar. She stands out there in her dresses. She's dancing. She's meeting people. She's on the, on the radio. She is gorgeous, and her voice. We wanted to hear her voice because we'd seen pictures of her, but for the first time in Australia, we actually got to hear her to see what she sounded like. Not so good for Charles, unfortunately, because not long before in Wales, he'd made a comment to one of the Queen's friends, Queen's cousins, saying that, she now gets all the attention, or words to that effect. And that was crystallised in the trip to Australia, that there was this young, beautiful, dynamic woman who suddenly everybody wanted to shake hands with, or wanted to smile at, or have a chat to. And so when the moment that they'd go one direction, she'd go one, he'd go the other, he'd almost hear a sigh when the people on his side that they weren't going to get Diana. So a tricky trip, but kudos to that couple, because of course it was the first time that a baby had been brought on a royal tour. So, it paved the way for Meghan and Harry, and of course Kate and William, to bring their children on trips in the future. So she was a groundbreaker.
Was this the first chink in their marriage? Did the Australia trip tip that marriage over the edge?
Look, they'd only been married a couple of years. They hadn't had Prince Harry at that stage. Look, very early on, even from their honeymoon, we know from Diana, her true story, the book where she spoke to Andrew Morton about her experiences, that even from the honeymoon, she realised that there were areas of incompatibility, of course. I think this highlighted that when they were working together, there were going to be some issues. But she was still very much in love with him at that stage, and he her, but in the whatever love means kind of landscape. I mean, clearly his feelings for Camilla are evident. You can see his happiness. In fact, I was listening to old interviews, and I really realised how much happier he is now, and how, it was obviously a failed marriage. They weren't compatible. There was a huge age difference. They had hugely different interests, and that became apparent on the Australian trip.
There were some beautiful moments together on the Australian trip. Her in her beautiful blue ball gown and them dancing. How, I guess, to the public, how much did they want to see that love?
We love a fairy tale, and we wanted to believe in that fairy tale. And at that stage, there was no indication that it wasn't anything other than a fairy tale, even if there were difficulties behind the scene. I think that's what we hope for people. We believe that royalty, I mean, obviously the template set by the Queen and Prince Philip, the most solid marriage. And while, the three of the Queen's children would go on to separate and divorce, we wanted to believe in it at that stage. And why not? He is the heir to the throne. She's this very glamorous kindergarten teacher who loves children. You could obviously see her natural mothering instincts. So there were lots of elements in the fairy tale that just resonated with the public. We want to believe. We still want to believe. We want to believe Kate and William. We want to believe William and Meghan. But do we really know what goes on behind the scenes?
And how glamorous was Princess Diana when she came to Australia? Some beautiful outfits. Describe to us how she looked.
Oh, well, the great thing about Diana's style was that it was essentially hers. Those beautiful big white collars on the grass on the lawn when she sat down and William played with the toy. The blue dress where they were dancing together. There's so many of those outfits which in the years since have been referenced by other women in the royal family, just particularly Kate and Meghan. And I think, she showed us for the first time. We'd had the Queen, and the Queen, of course, was a different figure and a shorter woman. But Diana really stepped into her role as a glamazon, as on the world stage. She understood colour. I mean, having met her, she was so tall, so elegant. Those legs went on for days. And so she looked amazing in clothes. And of course, with the jewellery, it was, we were seeing this beautiful young woman. Traditionally, we'd seen older women wearing the jewellery. This was the first time that we'd seen this very, very young, glamorous princess.